met yet, I'm Perkins. I'm the National Committee Woman for the Young Democrats of Georgia. And I am so excited to be hosting this panel. I've been working in politics for about 7 years, and I truly wish I had this back when I started. That would have been phenomenal. Throughout my career, I've been working very hard to elect women, and I want to kick this off by thanking each and every one of you for running for office. Y'all are paving the way for each of us and for generations to come. So thank you. I'd like to go down the line and have each of y'all introduce yourself to our lovely group here. Sure.
Hey y'all, my name is Ruwa Romman, and I'm actually a freshman this year. I represent Westbrook, so that includes parts of Duluth, all of Berkeley Lake, parts of Norcross, and parts of Peachtree Corners, which is like northeast of Atlanta, for those of you not familiar. And yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Hey everybody, I'm Anna Westbrook. I represent Georgia House District 163, which we're sitting just a few blocks away from my district, just south of here. So I represent the city of Savannah, city of Garden City, town of Vernonburg, and like one neighborhood in unincorporated Chatham County.
Hello everyone, my name is Yasmin Neal with District 79 in Clayton County, which is Morrow, Lake City, Forest Park, Riverdale, and as an easy reference, Hartsville International Airport, just right there. So it's District 79. This is actually my third term, 5th year, third term.
We're going to start out with a little bit of fun and do some rapid fire questions so we can get to know each other. It's going to be either or, so just let me know where you guys are at. So the first one is cake or pie? Oh, no. Cake.
Yeah.
Cake. Pie.
Yeah.
Cats or dogs?
Dogs. No, I can't pick. I got both. Dogs. That would kill me.
Alright, the next one's kind of hard. Beyonce or Rihanna?
Beyonce.
Beyonce.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, what is your Waffle House order? Ooh. We're in Georgia, so you got to
Tacos.
ask.
All-Star.
Yeah.
With regular hash browns with, is it scattered, covered, smothered, yep. And then bacon. That's it.
Nice.
Bacon, egg, and cheese on toast, hash brown scattered, smothered, and covered, and pecan waffle because you need the sweet and the savory.
Yes, that's a good one.
I do the cheese and eggs with a biscuit, hash browns, and my husband and I usually split it.
Nice. So jumping into things, right? I know we often talk very generally about the barriers that we as women in politics face, right? From working on campaigns to governing to running for office. But I'd love to know, what were some of the barriers that y'all faced in your path? What took you by surprise, and how did you overcome them?
So for me, I think my barriers ended up being external from the Capitol instead of internal. Because when I first came to the Capitol, I was a detective, a homicide detective. But I worked rape, robbery, all that stuff, undercover, you name it. And at the time, the administration was not supportive of me running. So they gave me an ultimatum to say either you give up your seat or we'll take your right to pay. And so I said, well, thousands of people voted for me, so I'm not giving up my seat. So they took my right to pay, even though other men who had run for office during that time had never been given that ultimatum. So it was 2 years of me having to fight that battle to get the EEOC involved. It turned into a whole thing. But I was working overnight. They put me on night shift, 10 to 6 a.m. And then the daytime I was with the Capitol. So at the time I was asking God for strength. I was like, oh, let them win. And I was successful in challenging the department at the time. But at the time, and moving everything forward since that moment, it's been external Capitol. It's never been anyone trying to hold me down with directly related to politics.
That's a good question. I think for me, a little bit of external, but also a good bit of internal. The external, being that, and I should say, I ran in 2020 and lost a very close election in 2020, so I won on my second try. And, but when I ran in 2020, we hadn't had women in our local, we hadn't had a woman in our local delegation in about 15 years. So there was just a real static idea of kind of like, well, this is what our delegation looks like, and there weren't any women in it. And I will say, one of my mentors, Edna Jackson, we are actually sitting in her district. She won in a special in November of 2021, which gave us more representation than I won in 2022. So I think that, I do think we get those ideas in our minds of what leadership looks like. And, but also for me, a lot of internal, which is that I was never really part of my life plan to run for office. I had a lot of interest in politics. I studied it a lot as a student, but I didn't see that just wasn't something I had in my plan. And so I was a volunteer with Moms Demand Action and got more and more interested and really felt like we need, more leadership that reflects our values and reflects the diversity of our state. But for me personally, I ran at a time when I was coming out of this sort of like intensive period in my life of, raising children and focusing a lot on that. And I had to kind of overcome in my own mind imposter syndrome and that sort of thing, and really realize I have a lot to offer. And, that experience of losing that first race, I ironically came out of it with like a lot more confidence in a lot of ways. So for me, some internal stuff of just having kind of been in a very intense, like family-focused period. But I think that's an asset in itself too. So.
Absolutely. And I'd love to uplift what you said about, working towards more reflective democracy, that when you look to leadership, there were no women involved. And, we know that out of the entire country, there's only one state that actually has a reflective democracy and 51% women, right? And here in Georgia, statistically would take us years to get to that point, but we're all gonna jump in and do the work, right? So I love that you said that, that's such a crucial component. And, when we talk about what cookie cutter leadership looks like, it doesn't look like us, right?
Yeah, oh god, I feel like I had all the obstacles. I actually had no intention of running, ever. And basically, long story short, a friend had asked me to give her feedback on a training that they were doing for Georgia Muslim Voter Project. And a reporter was there, and when she wrote her article about the importance of actually women, and particularly minority women running for office, the first sentence was Ruwa Romman is contemplating running for office. So there was a lot of like external bullying involved that led to me running, and I'm really grateful for it. But at the time, I remember thinking, we just moved back. I just finished grad school. I was in a really good job. We were trying to my husband and I were finally trying to get into like a steady space of neither of us is in school. Like we're just like working, trying to reconnect with friends and family, like taking care. We're also the oldest, and so there was this whole moment where I was like, why should I even do this? But then my community was very much like, you need to do this, and you've done this work, it's time for you to be at the Capitol, and like, rather than always there being like an intermediary, like why shouldn't we be the decision makers kind of thing. But I still had a lot of like that imposter syndrome of I've never run for office. I've done a lot of campaign work, but I've never run for office, and my name being on those flyers was just really weird, and like the idea that I would have to call people up and say, I'm worth the investment, or knock on someone's door and say, I'm worth your vote, was really, really hard for me. And then, in terms of life, like I said, I had a great job, and originally the plan was that if they gave me permission to run, and if I was to win, I would stay with them. But I guess they didn't really expect me to win, so now like having to figure out like, okay, like what is my career gonna look like moving forward, and all of that kind of stuff. So it was definitely a lot, but after this first session, I don't think I would change anything.
Love that. And that was actually a great lead into my next question. We all know that when being asked to run for office, no one asks men to run for office. They just have the audacity and they run for office. But consistently we see women have to be asked multiple times to run for office before we make the jump. And so from your perspective, how do you think we can shift that dynamic?
Yeah. I think it was a really important point to mention that if we see more women, if we see more people that look like us in these positions, it doesn't become an exception anymore, right? There's like, I'm actually excited for the day when there are no more firsts, because then that just makes it the typical situation. It's actually atypical that the chamber is so white and so male, right? Because it's not our state anymore. Our state is very different, it's very diverse in a lot of different ways. Whether it's socioeconomically, racially, you name it. And so it's sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy of if we want to change that dynamic, we have to be that dynamic. So.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I just think more and more different people stepping up to do it, and so that we have we really do have a legislature that looks like our state, and that was a big part of it for me. As I got interested in advocacy around this one issue that brought me to the General Assembly, and I was like, oh, well, this isn't what I was expecting. It didn't look like, my community, like my peer group. It didn't reflect the values that I know the folks around me care about. And so, and that's why we see so much policy that doesn't really reflect the values of our state, is because of that. So I agree. I think just like, encouraging as many people as possible, and also talking about some of what the barriers are. Not everybody can run for a job that pays this little, that requires you to be in Atlanta doing this really intense, like 3-month period. And then what are you doing the rest of the time? You do still have, you can support yourself that way. So I think we kind of have to talk about all those things and maybe think creatively about how we can make sure those structural barriers don't exist any more than is absolutely necessary.
Yeah, I agree. I think the first thing is women always have to feel prepared, and men don't. They'll just jump prepared any day of the week. But women always feel like they have to be prepared before they do something to include something like this. And this is really on-the-job training. You bring in your life experience, and you will find kind of your niche where once you kind of get filtered through committees, you'll kind of find your place. So that's one thing. Another thing too is, and I've dealt with this through many trainings with women, the barriers. Outside of the traditional barriers when it comes to politics itself, the barriers that are incurred upon us just through society. I've been sitting in trainings and say, oh, well, you can't run for office if you have a kid. You can't do it if you have this. You can't do it if you have this job. No, yes, you can. Granted, we understand the situation we're in. We know we get paid very little. And it has been designed that way to prevent working people to not be able to serve. But with that being said, that is why we must persist and find ways to overcome, which is like leading back to my first story. I wasn't gonna let them win. It was designed for me not to stay in the seat. And you're not gonna take that from me. And so I think once we start showing women how to get into politics in the space they're in, how to work it out, I think we'll have more women come to the front for office.
Agreed. I appreciate you mentioning the financial barriers that come with running for office, especially at the state level, right? It's always wild to me exactly what that is, for the sheer amount of work and stress and honestly nonsense that y'all have to deal with under the capital, how consistently that does prevent, working people and working families from running for office. Now, I know everyone in this crowd, and I know that this is a group that definitely wants to knock down financial barriers. So speaking about legislative session, right? I served as chief of staff and a lobbyist with labor for several years, and I know it is very intense, and it's not always, a walk in the park. So understanding this intense dynamic that we're walking into on behalf of the people that we care about in our communities, how do you protect your inner peace moving through this? I don't want to struggle with that.
I can jump in on that. And I lean sort of introvertish anyway, and so I honestly by day 40 I was thinking, I just like 6 inches of space around me. We're sitting closer than we're sitting now. There's someone right here, and we're all in the minority party, so most of us are seated right in the middle, so that you have to squeeze by a bunch of people, and so. I think the pace in terms of the work itself, the very long days at the Capitol, building relationships across the aisle. Lobbyists want to build relationships with you. There's a lot of socializing. It's all of that kind of stuff. I mean, for me, it was just like I need one night where I'm not not doing anything. I'm just gonna go home and order Uber Eats. And that may be an advantage in a way of the fact that I live so far from the capital, so that I have to be in Atlanta away from my family. And I know the Metro Atlanta folks have to do probably a lot more juggling of like normal life while they're in session. But it's super intense, and there's a lot of demands on your time. And you know, you want to do well. I mean, I know all of the three of us and most of the folks, I would say, you go there wanting to do a good job. And that means you're reading the book reports and you're trying to keep up with the bills and all the changes and all of that. So it is an intense kind of like demand on your time, your energy, your physical space, all those things.
So I have a massage therapist that's less than 15 minutes away from the Capitol. I start there. So I do go there. And maybe like little short increments of massaging is one part. But also too, I've always been very good with compartmentalizing. And I think this is my line of work and just life. And so I'm really good about turning, parts of my brain off. And if I'm at the Capitol, I have to focus on something at the Capitol that I just zone in on it. There's certain calls I won't take, meetings I won't take, and especially the newer people, they're gonna have to learn what to, because you don't do everything, you can't do everything, you just can't, but you do get better at navigating through what you should attend, what you should entertain. But for me, if something causes me stress or anxiety, I usually don't do it. And so that's how I keep my schedule tight, and people around me know how tight I keep things. Either I'm gonna do something or I'm not gonna do something. And when I'm very intentional on my time, I get everything done. I take advantage of like the moments in the Capitol when the chamber's empty. Those are my best times. I actually feel like I get more rest once I sit down and no one can come inside the chamber. But I think being intentional with my time and my schedule and staying tight to it. And if you don't fit in that schedule, it's not gonna happen. Usually whatever's on that schedule is a reason for it. I don't have much time to waste, so I don't waste much time. So that's what helps me.
I don't know how to like non-sarcastically say this, but I don't have inner peace yet. Like I'm 29, I'm still trying to find it. I catch glimpses of it every once in a while, but full disclosure, I preemptively put myself in therapy when I started running for office because I didn't know what to expect emotionally, mentally on myself. And I tried really hard to set time to work out. Actually, I found that was time where I could just like turn off my phone, turn off my brain, and just like not do something that requires thinking. Obviously, as session went on, those like helpful boundaries started to fall to the wayside, especially the last few weeks of session. But it at least got me to a place where I wasn't burnt out from 3 weeks out. I got burnt out on the very last day. But it's actually something I'm learning a lot of how to say no and how to prioritize and finding the inner peace to protect to begin with. But yeah, it's interesting.
I appreciate that. I also not know. I appreciate y'all's words of wisdom. I will make a mental note.
And in full disclosure, to me, I have a lot of, especially the newer people, like, hey, should I go to this? You don't need to go. Like, you learn how to sift through. I'm not saying things are important, but there's certain things that have to be at the top of the priority list in this space.
And creating those boundaries.
Yes.
Yeah. Boundaries. Folks at the Capitol don't really have boundaries. At least in my opinion. So, throughout my career, something that I've been very thankful for is my mentors and other women in politics who've gone around the block and are there for me as a support system, as a friend, a shoulder to lean on. And so for each of y'all, who is someone that y'all look up to or view as like a political icon and look to in those stressful moments?
This was actually one of the hardest things for me about running for office. Is a lot of my friends are in the C3, C4 space. So particularly in the primary, I didn't have friends for 3 months because I really wanted it to be clear that whatever endorsements our campaign got, we earned. And on that note, one of my closest friends, and the reason I even dared to run for office as a job-wearing Muslim woman in Georgia is because my friend Aisha, who ran ironically in the same district, was just drawn very differently beforehand, and she's kind of been somebody that's really paved the way for me and people like me. And so I remember there were several times during session where I was just kind of what did I get myself into? But it was really great to find somebody that at least knew this space enough, but also understood the background I was coming from, and she'd known me for a long time and knew who I was to be you're doing this really well, like how do you do it? And like talking to her from like a different perspective. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of mine certainly is Representative Emmett Jackson, who is the mayor of Savannah, who is just just a wonderful person who has wonderful relationship skills, and that's kind of one of those people who like when it's just really been a day, I can just go like sit and like gossip about whatever or get advice. I also got a lot of support from Georgia Windlist. Like that whole network has been huge for me. I think all of us have gotten some support there. Lloyd Easter's the executive director knows literally everyone in Georgia politics, and so especially my first run, which for me was like such a and Ruwa kind of talked about this. You're putting your name out there on those signs and those mailers, and it's such a putting yourself out there, and you were inviting so much energy to come back at you. And I know that like I know you've had that, and I know you've had that too, and it can be really intense. It's a lot to just feel coming your way. So that network was great for me, and people who come up through that network. I remember getting a call soon after I had a primary only race, and I was being invited to do something, and I was like, this is obvious, this is super shaky. And of course that's not how it works, but I called Senator Elena Parent, and I was like, is this okay for me to do? Because I assume it is, but I just want to make sure. So, having those folks who have been doing this a little bit longer, and the novelty's worn off for them, and it's just a job, and kind of helping those experiences.
Empower women, empower women.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm not just one person. Like I've always looked up to the Hillary Clintons of the world since I was a little girl. And I always felt away. I think initially she wanted to go first. What's supposed to be Bill first? Supposed to be her first. That's another story for another day. But with that being said, I think it's the idea that I've had since I was a little girl of being in politics. I've actually ran all my life. I was like the high school president, then undergrad, like I was like the residency housing president, like all these things I had to run for. But at the same time, my actual mentor I actually had would be Stephanie Stuckey Benfield. She was here many, many years ago. And I'm not sure if you're ever been on the highway and you're driving and those big Stuckey gas stations, that's her. And so she just took me under her wing, and I was like her wingman for a year or two. And then when my seat was coming vacant, at the time I didn't know. And she called me and was like, you ready? I said, okay, let's go. So Willis came down, Willis got involved because the guy I was running against, he was a woman beater, and like it turned into like a whole thing. He was about to be arrested. It's a lot going on. And so between that and then like the women's groups and organizations I'm associated with, and even like the women's campaign school at Yale, they've all been so very supportive. And that's a nationwide, actually international network of people. I think it's like the idea around politics and just everybody that's kind of tied to me that has pushed me to run and to keep running.
And Georgia has such amazing women-led groups, right? From Windlist to Emerge. There's such a great.
Her term is another one I probably should have mentioned. I mean, and I think they do a good job of like not duplicating effort. They all kind of like carve out their own lanes and way to help women campaigns.
Absolutely, and I know that they work great together, and we used to go to brunch pretty regularly to talk about it, But I'm always very thankful for those organizations. So shifting a little bit back to the campaign perspective, right? Something that I feel like we all see time and time again is when you're beginning to launch a campaign and seek endorsements and seek support, whether it's from the political community or your own community, is the viability test. And we all know that men pass that like real quick, right? And we often see women, their campaigns being called into question. Are they really viable for this office? Can they actually win? Are they going to do the work? And we all know that's nonsense, right? We know that when women run, women win consistently, right? And so, from your perspective, first, that's something that popped up for each of y'all, but how did y'all overcome that? I mean, y'all are elected now, and we see this viability problem constantly and across the country. I was I'm asking that as I'd love for everyone in this room to eventually either run for office or run a campaign.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have a viability problem. I think one thing that has helped me naturally is I think the blue law, because of law enforcement that puts the citizens in a headspace of trust and they see authority, and so I feel like the level of preparation is kind of assumed. So no one ever, I don't think I've ever had anybody question if I can do the job or not. I think I just had a ballot at the ballot box. I don't think no one's ever said, hey, she can't do the job. I guess they kind of figured if she's been working for us anyway and answering 911 calls and all that stuff in between, we kind of figure she'll be okay.
You're already doing
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. So, right.
Yeah, I definitely had it. I'm 29, I'm a woman, I'm Palestinian, I wear a hijab. And I remember multiple people kind of sat me down and said, you know, this is going to be really hard. Like, are you sure you really want to do this? Can you even do this? During my primary, there was definitely like a very strong whisper campaign about whether or not I am a viable candidate, and that really made it that much harder to fundraise. But then, and I was very clear when people asked me around, I was like, I don't know how to fundraise to save my life. I can run a campaign like the back of my hand. I will knock the door that will do what I need to do, but I need you to help me raise the money. And I gave them a goal and I said, we had like 15 days to launch. And I was like, I want by the first deadline, January 31st, raise $60,000. They're like, you're insane. I'm like, all right, then I'm not running. And so they like went and talked amongst themselves, like, all right, like we can figure this out. And so I literally outraised my opponent 2 to 1 and started door knocking just to convince people that I knew what I was doing, because it was an immediate question of like, how dare she run? Like, who is this person? Like, where is she coming from? Because I was always politics adjacent, right? Like, I wasn't in the party necessarily. I was very much doing like the organizing, the on the ground work, the community type work. And so there has to be like, but I mean, to full disclosure, like Dems were awesome. Like I sat down with their folks and they were really welcoming and supportive. They were just worried about this like young person putting herself out there like this. But it worked out. Like I said, you just kind of have to sometimes set a benchmark and say, if I reach this, can I get your support? Like if somebody says, I don't think you're a viable candidate, be like, all right, give me a metric. Like give me a metric that you need me to reach in order for me to convince you that I'm a viable candidate. I set my own like an insane person, but like you don't have to, like if I could tell myself one thing, lower your standards a little bit, because you don't have to be as perfect as you think you have to be worthy of this space.
And you know, that's so very common in Georgia, right? The very first campaign I ever worked on was B. Wynn's first steakhouse race. And I was so excited. I love beef jerky. And I distinctly remember, you know, first joining as my very first leadership role. And right out of the gate, I had a then very powerful consultant who was a man tell me to my face, you know, she's not viable. And then told me that it's so good that I'm working on this campaign. Every good operative needs to lose. We didn't lose, that really made me mad. Very typical of this. So I know that she had to go out with those questions as well, and I could see consistently how draining that was. But you know, I'm so proud of her and you for pushing past that. Because we love to, you know,
I love to go around. Yeah, literally. I was like, if you want to figure out a way to like get me to do stuff, just tell me that I won't be able to do it.
exactly.
I don't think I specifically faced the viability issue, especially if you're talking about it in terms of like on paper. Because I feel like there's on paper, and you know, as both Yasmin, I know Yasmin has made this comment, I mean, we tend to wait until we're like super ready and very qualified. And so I think there's that. But again, there's this idea of like what a leader looks like. And so many of us are, I remember that primary, I think that was like a 5-way primary.
Well, it was.
Yeah.
It was not.
And there were some,
It was not very nice.
and there were some, you know, very good candidates in that. And the first time I ran, I was one woman in a primary with 4 other men to start with. So, you know, so again, it's kind of like pushing past this idea of what a leader looks like. And I feel like, to me, some of the best examples of this, or some of the starkest examples are kind of from national politics. You mentioned Hillary Clinton. And I feel like I'm seeing this with Vice President Harris, because the reality is we have a very old president right now. I mean, that's just a fact. And so we're thinking about that VP role, I think, in different ways. And we've got to get past the idea of like, well, a leader looks like this behind a podium. A leader's like 6 feet tall and has a certain kind of voice, and you know, women leaders are just going to present differently. And so we've got to get used to a different look behind the podium, a different, you know, voice register. And the beauty of that is we also get different sets of experiences and different policy focus too. So that's just what I would say is I think there's that on paper versus the, again, this image of who a leader is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's always that, you know, externally with the public, what does a leader look like? And then even internally as women,
Yeah.
how are we tackling what a leader looks like? And at the end of the day, a leader looks like all of us.
Absolutely. And I'll just say too, like, I think for all of us, you know, we know that like we all harbor biases too. I mean, and it's, you know, it doesn't make us bad people, it just makes us humans, that's how our brains are wired. But I think kind of thinking about it and talking about it and being aware of it, and when women do step up, let's be quick to see what they bring to it.
Absolutely.
Quick to recognize like what their skill sets are and, you know, what's something that they unique that they bring, rather than, you know, because I think especially when we're Democrats, we don't want to think that we have some of these biases in our own minds too. But they're there, and so I think just, you know, be quick to arrest them when they pop up, and also quick to see what, you know, somebody who's different brings to.
Yeah, I didn't buy.
Oh,
Yeah.
wait a minute.
Yeah.
So I'd love to do just one more question and then hear a little bit of Q&A. And so my last question is, you know, we have so many amazing young women as part of the Young Dems of Georgia. We have our brand new College Democrats Vice President, and we have women leading all across the state. And so, you know, what is the one thing you'd like everyone in this room to take home from this panel?
Everyone's gonna question you. Don't make your voice an additional one among that sea of criticism. It's just not worth it, and there's gonna be enough people questioning you and doubting you. If you're not gonna stand in your corner, no one else will.
That's very good advice. Yeah, I mean, I would just say you have something to offer. You do. You have something to offer that no one else has to offer. And I'm talking to everybody in this room. I'm all for hashtag elect women, but like we've got great men leading in this community too. I mean, across the state. So like you have something to offer. As Ruwa said, there will be critics. There will be lots of them. So, you know, don't be one of them. Just think about all the things that you have to add that nobody else can offer except for you.
I'll start with saying you only live once. So if there's anything in this life you want to do, even when that little voice in the back of it's like, I'm not sure, do it anyway. I always push back when people say things like, oh, it's never been done before, so you can't do it. I always push back against that, especially in the world of politics, because I believe that faith has a lot to do with politics, whether we believe it or not. And I believe that I feel like you should always be willing to bet on yourself. And even if someone says, hey, we've never had this type of person in this seat before, what have you, don't let those types of things discourage you. You say, hey, we probably haven't, but I could be the first, like we know here. So, and especially if you want to run for a seat, I say put your name on the ballot. And like for me, when I first ran, I lost, but we knew I was going to lose because we didn't know how to really get into politics because we did dumb Dems and stuff like that. But actually, putting your name on the ballot and some of the process is different. And so when we did that, and me and my team, because there was some young Dems, we was all young Dems. I'm the candidate. I'm like, hey guys, you all have to play one of the roles that we see them play in real life. And because we lost, we also had a crash course in the process. And so the next time we got the call, we're like, okay, now we can actually win, and we know what we're doing. And so I just say be fearless and don't let anybody tell you what you can't do, especially in this space. Especially if they say something like, oh, it's never been done before, because you could be that person. Period.
I love that. Be fearless.
Yeah, that's great. Most people lose their first election. And I think that's statistically proven. I mean, Ruwa's maybe the exception on this panel, but most people do. And so there's no shame in it. And I think like, you know, I lost a really close election in 2020, 19 votes. And I really came out of it thinking like, when it opened back up in 2022, I was like, if I can survive that, 5-way primary runoff, closest race in Georgia basically, recount, all this stuff. Like, what is 2022 going to throw at me that I haven't already survived before? So
I do want to jump in and say one thing too. When it comes to fear is so funny. But for me, when you lose, and when you get over the fear of losing, I feel like unstoppable because you're like, so you might lose, and I've done that before.
That's it.
That's not gonna stop me. So definitely, really being able to challenge fear, face to face, I feel like it will get you through anything. Just you can't be afraid of falling. You always get back up.
I will say this, look, just real quick on the piece about losing, I literally had to ask myself, how would I feel if I lost? And what would that look like? And I literally needed to picture for myself what a loss would look like to be brave enough for the potential of a loss, if that makes sense. And that's really helpful to understand. Your life is still there. You have a whole life. Like, if you should be very passionate about politics, you spend a lot of your time and energy in politics and building up movements, but at the same time, you also need to have a really good foundation. And so, like, lean on your peers, lean on those around you, lean on your friends and loved ones, because that fear of losing, if you've got that foundation to fall back on, it really does make the fall seem so much less.
and all that stuff is still there.
Exactly.
It's all still there if you lose.
Absolutely. Thank you. I love that. So I'd love to open up the floor to questions, but we're gonna do the raise the hand so this doesn't get too rowdy. Yes.
So we talked a lot about sort of the barriers to getting elected and sort of what that process of running looks like. But I was sort of wondering, once you are in the position, whether it be an elected position or even just a workplace environment, there are a lot of barriers that are there as well. And sort of how do you deal with, I suppose, what we call, or what I like to call, like, boys club. Like, there's always that one group of men who they always already know each other. They're always, already like buddy in a way, and it can feel very, I suppose, exclusive and very hard to break into and very hard to be taken seriously. And sort of, it's like, how do you handle that with, with grace and with kindness, but also while, standing your ground and, doing the things that you want to get done?
Great question, Katie.
I'll jump in. Befriend the boys.
Yeah.
I'm big on boys clubs. I'm big on doing what I need to get into them. I know for me, I know my law enforcement background really helped me push open that door. It's a little easier for me to get into certain rooms that there usually no other women in. But I come in as my full self and everybody else that looks like me or has my same gender as well. I look forward to bringing myself and everybody that looks like me into the room, even if I'm that isolated person. But we all know it's a chess game down at the Capitol, especially in that space. And so you need to learn to play that game. And by playing that game, that gets you into the boys club as best you can. There's some things you probably can't break outside of developing deeper relationships, but there's nothing wrong sucking it up, dealing with it you probably wouldn't typically deal with on a traditional day. But when you realize who you're down at the Capitol to serve, you do what you need to do to get in the room.
I would echo relationship building, and I'm a lawyer by profession, so I've been in situations. I've worked in firms where I was the only woman at times, and so like I have some comfort level with that at this point just because I had the experience. But and I will say this: the beautiful thing about being Democrats is, like, look at our caucus. I mean, like, at least within our caucus, and we got our issues as a caucus. We have a lot of difference we have to navigate as a caucus, but we have a lot of women in leadership within our caucus, and so I think that's huge. Now, we're also the minority party in the General Assembly, and so that's where Representative Neal's point comes in. It's like, if you want to get things done, you have to build relationships, and we have people who are really good at that. And for me, that's one of those things where I'm like, I need to improve on that. I need to get better at that. I can be a little introverted, and I can get a little tired of just like all the stuff. But relationships are everything, and I've seen you do that. I've seen you do that in your committee meetings. I saw Ruwa do that this year. Ruwa made friends playing many ways, including playing kickball. And so, like, just, I would say, pick somebody out who you see is doing a good job of that, and watch what they're doing, and just, imitate it.
So one of the things I had to mentally come to terms with accepting this role is that I have a responsibility, and that is to make sure that the people who who elected me, their voices were heard in every room, which meant that I had to be in every room, period. I grew up in Forsyth County, Georgia, which also, so you know,
So
high
same
school,
for
fellow high school grads with Marjorie Taylor Greene, and fun times. And that experience, it's true. But Summerside is very different now, by the way,
It
for
is.
the record. But that experience really taught me the importance of not viewing all hate in the same shape. And what I mean by that is there are people who are militantly hateful, that no matter what you do, nothing is going to change that. But there are people who are ignorantly hateful. And those people are, malleable is not the right word, like they're just people who if you just engage with them, they are actually reasonable, they just have never been exposed to anything different. And that's how I decided to approach the Capitol this year. I went into it and I said, you know what, every single one of those people in the room is going to look at me and they're going to have their own first impressions and that's on them. But what I can do is I can control my own behavior. And I very intentionally would just like walk up to people like, hi, I'm Ruwa, and like very like obnoxiously interrupt conversations and like kind of like shove my way into rooms and stuff. And I think being 29 and having like looking younger, it really made people drop their guard around me, because what happened was we built these like personal sort of banter relationships, whatever. And then when I started talking policy, they were like, oh, you actually know what you're talking about. You've got experience, you've got over a decade of like working in this space, and you've got the expertise to back it up, both professional and outside of it. And it really changed the dynamic in terms of being, not necessarily, actually I was literally invited into a room one time. It was like some like Republican member suite, and it was on the second to last day of legislative session. They were all like drinking, and I was like trying to get to my office, and they like were like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm gonna go to my office and like not talk to anybody." Like, "No, you should come hang out with us." And in fact, one of my Republican colleagues got really upset. He's like, "Why are you inviting her in here?" Like, we want to get to know her. Like, it like shifted the dynamic by the end of session, because like it went from suspicion and like what are we gonna do with her to like really really curious. Like, I want to know like what this is. And I just leaned into it. I approached every conversation with the best of intentions and assumed the best of intentions until proven otherwise.
That's really smart. Thank you so much, guys.
Wow. Yeah. Do you have another question? We have a few questions. Okay, why don't we go to Axel and then we'll go over here.
Rep Romman, your answer just made me think of this. Something that I've experienced a lot in politics and in really every job I've had, and I've had a lot, has it's been just kind of, and I'm Irish, I have a little bit of a temper. Being a woman in any professional space, a lot of men, they make certain comments about, you know, your appearance or your weight, or they want to say something about women in general, just aren't really suited to this role, but you're good at it, you know. How do you kind of resist the urge that a lot of us have to kind of pop off at these people and want to go at them and prove them wrong and everything, but you still have to retain that diplomatic kind of character, especially in politics?
Depends on the person.
Mhm.
People have different personalities. And again, depends on the person. One way I do it is I ask them to explain the joke to me.
Mhm.
And it's like really fun to watch. Or I'll go something along the lines of like, I'm not an exception. Like, do you see like so and so and so and so? Like, yeah, you know, that's, you know, good point. Another thing I tend to do is I'm just like, I literally shake my head and I'm like, are you serious right now?
Mhm.
And like, again, it depends on my level of like trust and a relationship with that person. I flat out shame people, like I don't care. And it genuinely depends. Like, there are people that I treat like they're younger siblings, and I like, you need to be a better person.
Mhm.
There are people who like have a lot of gravitas in that chamber, and so I have to like massage it a little bit more.
Mhm.
But you just kind of have to. I'm not somebody who has patience, so I've had to exercise a lot of self-control.
I guess for me, I definitely think a lot still goes back to just my work over time. I've been in, you know, the back of undercover trucks with guys, and they're talking about girls or whatever they got going on. It's been like, it's like a whole thing all the time. So I've heard the worst of the worst outside of that, so it's starch. But also too, like I said, I'm really good with compartmentalizing, and I know my goals and intentions for the Capitol. So if I do meet those conversations inside the chamber, I use it as a moment to bond. I use it as a moment to get a dig back in at them that they might catch like 20 minutes later, like, I think you can talk to me. No.
Those are my favorite.
Yes, but you know, being able to take those moments, especially not the ones with sexual harassment, like
Oh yeah,
huge difference.
report those.
Yeah.
Report those.
Yeah.
I just.
Right. But there are other aspects of this that you can use to build a relationship with, you know, your male counterparts and what have you.
Yes.
And there's a way to make it where, and when you talk about the report, when it comes to, it's probably a joke I can tell with probably half of the room down there because of those moments that were off the hip, that I turned into a joke, and we turned into a moment, and use those things to break the ice. Because that conversation is easier later when you come back and ask them for some money, or ask them for something, or ask them to move a bill. Being able to use the banter that kind of created a friendship for your advantage. So, like I said, it's still a chess game, and try to use every tactic you can to play it, and that can be one of them. And that's what I do.
I would just add, and I feel like the Tennessee 3 story sort of illustrated this, where we really saw decorum kind of weaponized a little bit. But these places do run on that.
Yeah.
And so I'm like middle-aged and Southern and way too polite a lot of times. So like it's an environment I can operate in because you do have to have a lot of self-control. We do have people who pop off sometimes. And there's a place for that. So I don't mean this critical, but at the same time, it can be hard to come back from that too. And so it can be hard to come back from that and then say, I need your help on this bill. This really is a good idea.
And that happens all the time.
Put your name on it if you want. Just keep it, just move it. So, I mean, I think it's just something you have to keep in mind that this is, it's a different role from like, especially if you come from more of an activism kind of role. Like it's a different set of skills. Relationship skills are hugely important. So, I haven't had too much of that directed at me, at least in one session. But your relationships really are your currency.
So we're gonna do 2 more questions, and then we're gonna wrap up, because I know we have voting coming up soon. We'll be here and there.
So, my name is Davis Green, so I'm from Augusta. And so I ran for the House District 129 seat out of Augusta. And I did not win my first time. And as the young lady was saying about how you keep trying and going, I'm really wanting to, I've always wanted to be in politics. I had a desire to be in politics. So I thought maybe I'd throw my hat in the ring because I go to Georgia Southern. So I was like, maybe I'd throw my hat in the ring and see what happens. But I noticed that Augusta is that city where they're still in the same old mindset and they don't want change. And to them, I was a threat to that change, to that mindset, because I wanted to go up to Atlanta and actually try to implement things to benefit younger people like myself, being in the university system in Georgia and, that sort of thing. So what is your advice for anybody that's young who is trying to run for politics in an environment where people don't want to accept their candidacy because they're young?
I mean, for me, I didn't plan on running, but part of the reason that I had legitimacy is because I put in the work out, with the community, right? You can't expect people to invest in you if you haven't invested in them. And find your niche. We all have something to offer. And if you're able to point to something with the results to it, it's a lot harder for the naysayers to be effective because you can literally point to something and say, I know you're wrong and here's why. I've been doing this for 5 years. I've been doing this for 10 years. I've literally seen the difference. And it's sort of a balancing act of messaging versus action, right? We want the change in message. We want that, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? And I feel like our generation has gotten really good about doing both simultaneously, and you just gotta keep chipping at it. That is the other very important piece. Is I'm noticing this conversation of, well, we did this in 2022, like, I would do it again in 2024. Like, yes, we have to do this again forever. Like, democracy is an active verb, and you can't just think you've checked off a box. Like, there's so many layers involved, and the deeper you go into it, the more you sort of build that, like, okay, this person is effective, this person knows what they're talking about, they've at least been in it, and they get it, and over time, dominoes will fall. So.
Agree. I think if you want to serve, you will serve. And it may not be an elected office right now, but it'll be something if that's in your heart, you know, you will serve somewhere and it will be noticed. People will see it. And you'll learn, and the next election you'll have had all the experience you've had. You know, I think again, I mean, just going through a campaign and election, even if you lose, that experience is so invaluable. It will build your confidence, it will build your skills, it will build your name recognition in your community. So just if it's on your heart, keep doing it, and it will pay off.
And that's one thing real quick. Well, I know your race and you were going against a lineage with a name that you carried for many years, so you definitely can't judge you losing based on that. That's the first thing. Second of all, when I do hear a lot of young people run for office, a lot of them run, but they run, like Ruwa said, with no work done in the community. And anytime any young person asks me, hey, what should I do to start running for office? I say, you need to get into your community, start volunteering for some stuff. That's just how it is. You have to tell the community what you've been doing for them prior to you running for the seat. If you can't do that, you're gonna lose every time.
Can I add a caveat to that is, don't do something for the sake of building a run for office.
Yes, that's
It's very clear when people do that. It's very disingenuous when people do that. And every single one of you has a passion and something to offer.
go do
So
that.
don't,
Yeah.
don't like try to fit literally any cookie cutter. Nobody would have thought I was gonna run for office. I don't even know what I was doing for office. So like, you know, there you go. Like, you know.
You did.
Awesome, great question. And we're gonna go in the back.
Hey, this is Daniela Rodriguez, and I live here in Savannah, Georgia. I'm also an immigrant, and I know that there's many people from my immigrant community who would love to run for office, but they're not eligible to, right? And also who are not eligible to vote because we're not U.S. citizens. Why would you? So, because of this, the reasons that I previously mentioned, sometimes they're they're discouraged from being involved in politics. So for the women who are not eligible to run for office and who are not eligible to vote, what would you tell them to motivate them to stay involved in politics?
I'll tell them to find somebody that represents the culture, that is in a space to run, where you see the people on ballots and rally around them, start to organize. Put your money, put your time, put your energy into the person that is the embodiment of what you all represent, and push and do the work behind them in that capacity. That's what I would.
And you can hold them accountable too, because you know, once you've been a part of getting that person there, they need to be accountable to you, and the issues that you care about, that you told that person about, that led you to support that person. So I think that's a big part of it too. I mean, like, you know, we know who supported us. You know, we know the groups that rallied behind us, and like, you know, I know that I want to be there for them, and I don't ever want them to think, well, once our campaign was over, we never saw her again. So I think Representative Neal's advice is great, and then just don't go away after that. Make sure you hold them accountable.
So I view my position as a conduit. Staff run the Capitol. When we say lobbyists, by the way, that includes advocacy organizations. Building political power is not a picture on a flyer or a brochure or a yard sign. Building political power is sustainable relationship building over time with the people both in power and outside of power. This isn't outside, inside. I firmly believe to make change, you have to do it within the system and outside the system. Each of us has a role to play as a stakeholder in all of this to move us forward in the direction that is right. And so even though you can't donate, even though you can't be a candidate, you can't vote, you can still knock doors. You can still work for that campaign. You can still influence within your own community and build power within your own community, so that if a sitting representative ever tries to come for your community, they won't even dare to, Because even though you're not at that table, you literally have enough power to mobilize against them in such an effective way, there will be consequences for their actions. And I think a lot of times that's missing in our political process is the subsequent consequences of, I elected you to do X, Y, and Z, you didn't do it, we're getting you out there. And I say that as somebody who's like primary, like I literally think primaries are incredibly healthy things. I think they're important things for a party. And I think that like, it's how we move the conversation forward, but it's also, frankly, for me personally, it keeps me alive in that gold dome because the amount of pressure we get to conform into a certain way, in a certain like person, is so intense that we need that counter influence to be able to say, no, this is right. Like I know I'm right. Just because you're here all the time, standing around, does not mean that that is the actual general belief in the rest of the state. And so those voices are important. Come to the table, come to the Capitol, come do the work, do the adjacent work, do the work that's in it. There's just too many roles to be like, it's only elected official work or bust.
Can I make a general statement?
Absolutely.
So when it comes to all of you here, definitely take advantage of the people in this room, like just the YDs all together. I can say that I was here many years ago. But I'm not that old. But I will say that everybody that started with me, the Keena Williams of the world, the Ted Terrys of the world, we were all YDs. And then outside the elected personnel, the people that are running presidential campaigns, especially over the last 5-10 years, we were all YDs together. And so take advantage of these networks, empower one another, work together, because this is a direct line to directly where you're trying to go. And so, like I said, I know so many people across the state because we started so long ago together, from here, Savannah, Valdosta, you name it, because of that, having those relationships. So this isn't a waste of time. There's true value here. You never know who you're sitting next to in this room.
Your network is everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this network will carry you for the rest of your life. I'm telling you right now.
So y'all, let's give it up for our amazing